After the recent loss of my father, I made the decision to split the $5 million inheritance between my mother and myself. This resolution came during a deeply emotional moment, shortly after my father's funeral, as I reviewed the inheritance documents. Brian, without any real connection to the situation, casually remarked, "Laura, don't be greedy." His next words were even more shocking. "Finally, I can quit my job. I owe it all to that doddering old man." I was stunned. "Are you talking about my father?" I asked, barely able to hide my disbelief. Brian ignored my reaction and, along with my mother-in-law, excitedly began discussing plans to buy a new car and go on a shopping spree. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, still mourning my father's death, overwhelmed by household responsibilities, and now I had to listen to them belittle the man who had just passed away. The thought of continuing to live with Brian and my mother-in-law suddenly seemed unbearable. Trying to hold it together, I managed a forced smile and replied, "Sure, do whatever you and my mother-in-law want with the money. My name is Laura Brown, I'm 40 years old, a housewife, and I work alongside my husband." Growing up as the only child of two doctors who ran a well-regarded clinic in our hometown, I was showered with affection. Despite choosing a career in pharmacology over medicine, my parents supported my decision wholeheartedly. Tragedy struck 8 years ago when my mother died in an accident, leaving my father and me devastated. During that difficult time, Brian, then my boyfriend, was my emotional rock. We met through a mutual friend, and 3 years after my mother's death, Brian proposed. Though Brian worked as an ordinary salaryman in the food and beverage industry and earned less than I did, I believed that love would help us overcome any challenge. My father was thrilled when I announced our engagement. "I've seen how Brian supports you, Laura. Thank you so much. Please continue to take care of her," he said, to which Brian promised, "I'll make her happy." Standing beside him, I felt a surge of happiness, convinced that we had a bright future ahead of us. But when we visited Brian's family to announce our engagement, his mother, a heavily made-up divorcee, scrutinized me with a critical eye. "Marriage, huh? You're Brian's choice? Isn't she a bit plain for you? And older, too. Wouldn't a younger woman be more suitable?" she remarked, making me feel as though my dreams were shattering. Brian's response surprised me. When his mother questioned whether a younger, prettier girl would be a better match for him, he defended me. "Laura works at Gold Pharmaceuticals, and her dad is a doctor who runs his own practice," he said, focusing more on the financial aspects of my background than my personal qualities. His mother's attitude shifted immediately. "Oh, Brian, you should have mentioned these important details sooner. That changes everything. I'm happy to approve of the marriage. Nice to meet you, Laura." "Thank you." With his mother's approval, Brian was overjoyed, but as we moved forward with our marriage preparations, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. When we officially registered our marriage, my father, not only a doctor but also a property developer, gifted us an apartment in Philadelphia as a wedding present. "Dad's given us this apartment as a wedding gift," I shared with Brian. "It's our new home. Let's live here happily together." Brian's smile beamed with happiness, marking the start of our married life. But the reality of marriage soon revealed uncomfortable truths. Brian, who had lived with his parents until we married, seemed almost incapable of handling any household responsibilities. He couldn't cook, didn't know how to use the washing machine, and showed no interest in learning. His habits were messy, garbage piled up, and he never bothered to clean. While I was committed to sharing responsibilities equally, Brian's carelessness only fueled my frustration during our first year of marriage. I took on all the household duties, even though it was still supposed to be our honeymoon phase. The weight of managing both work and home life alone quickly wore me down. By our second year of marriage, I had reached my breaking point and realized it was time to have a serious conversation about sharing the responsibilities. Gathering my courage, I voiced my dissatisfaction to Brian, hoping for some understanding or at least a willingness to make a change. To my dismay, his response was neither grateful nor reflective. "I'm tired from work too," he said dismissively. "You're much better at chores than I am. It's better if you handle them, since I'm not good at it." Just like that, my concerns were brushed aside. Brian continued to avoid helping with the housework, leaving me to handle the household almost entirely on my own. As the years passed, the weight of our responsibilities became heavier on my shoulders. But that wasn't the only issue. After marrying Brian, I discovered his mother's demanding expectations. Brian never seemed to care much for celebrating special occasions, so I decided to send his mother a thoughtful gift for Mother's Day. I chose a high-quality scarf and a bouquet of carnations, hoping she would appreciate the gesture. However, her response was anything but appreciative. She called me, clearly displeased, and criticized the scarf for not being a luxury brand. I tried to explain that it was a quality item, but she dismissed me, insisting that only gifts from well-known luxury brands were acceptable. Bewildered, I shared the incident with Brian when he returned home, hoping for some support. Instead, his response was dismissive as well. "It's just a scarf. Just do as she says." From then on, to avoid conflict, we resorted to sending her cash, as she demanded. By our 6th year of marriage, Brian's mother began visiting more frequently, always finding new reasons to ask for money. Without hesitation, Brian would hand it over with a smile. Despite having a job myself, Brian's modest income made managing our finances increasingly difficult. Desperate, I started dipping into our savings and cutting living expenses. Despite my frustrations, I reminded myself that Brian's mother had supported me during tough times, and as the mother of someone I cared about, I felt compelled to endure these challenges. Now, 7 years into our marriage, I continued to manage the household duties while also dealing with the constant demands for money from my mother-in-law. Then, one day, my father, whom I hadn't seen in a while, called me unexpectedly. The news he shared during our rare meeting was heart-wrenching. He revealed that he was suffering from terminal cancer, and that treatment was no longer an option. Overcome with shock, tears spilled from my eyes. My father gently stroked my head, comforting me as he had when I was a child, and softly said, "Laura, this is fate. Let's accept it quietly." Faced with this devastating news, my days became a relentless juggling act. Between work, household responsibilities, and visits to my father's hospital, life became an exhausting balance. While my job offered some flexibility, managing the household continued to be a significant challenge. When I informed Brian that I would be caring for my father during his illness, I was met with indifference. There was no reaction, no offer of help, just a detached, "Please do your best." He visited my father in the hospital only once, and the rest of the time, I was left to navigate these overwhelming challenges alone. Managing my father's sudden decline was more than I could bear, and Brian's lack of support only compounded the strain. With all my attention focused on my father, I had little energy left for Brian. Any spare moments I had were naturally devoted to my father. One day, as my father lay weak in his hospital bed, he suddenly asked, "Laura, how is your marriage with Brian going?" His question took me by surprise. As I reflected on Brian's indifference at home and his mother's constant demands, I found myself at a loss for words. My hesitation must have shown, as my father gently took my hand and said, "You don't have to endure all of this. Think about your happiness. Don't worry, you won't face any hardships after I'm gone." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I wept as he held my hand, offering silent comfort. 4 months later, my father passed away quietly, leaving a profound emptiness in my heart. I began the painful task of arranging his funeral, but even in my sorrow, Brian remained detached. He didn't offer to help with the preparations, leaving me to shoulder it all. Despite my grief, I focused on the funeral details, unable to spare much thought for Brian. Friends and acquaintances came to pay their respects, making the farewell a deeply emotional occasion. Even Brian and his mother, who often seemed indifferent, attended. The following day, after the funeral, I received a call from a lawyer about my father's inheritance. I arranged a meeting to go over the details, and what I learned was overwhelming. After taxes and fees, my father's estate amounted to over $5 million. His success as a doctor, combined with his real estate investments, had left behind a substantial fortune, one that was to be inherited by me, his only daughter. The news filled me with surprise and gratitude, but also anxiety at the thought of managing such a significant amount of money. I proceeded with the inheritance process, still reeling from the magnitude of it all. When I returned home, I spread out the documents from the lawyer on my desk, reading through them as exhaustion overtook me. I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke, I could hear Brian and his mother laughing and talking cheerfully from the other room. Their conversation seemed far too jovial, given the recent loss we had just suffered. Their laughter felt disconnected from the grief and responsibilities that weighed heavily on me, making me feel more isolated than ever. As I slowly sat up, I was startled to see Brian approaching me with a beaming smile. "Yes, Laura, well done," he exclaimed, his sudden excitement throwing me off guard. I stared at him, confused, unsure of how to react. I noticed the inheritance papers in Brian's hand, the very documents I had received from the lawyer. Shocked and angry, I immediately snapped, "Wait, don't just read those without asking." It was appalling that Brian had gone through them without my permission, but my mother-in-law, unfazed by my distress, chimed in cheerfully, "Wow, $5 million inheritance? Isn't that amazing? Now we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives. I was stunned. I couldn't understand why she seemed so entitled to the inheritance, as if it were hers to claim. Then Brian turned serious, his words landing like a punch. I've decided the $5 million will be split between me and my mom. My heart sank. The timing couldn't have been worse. Right after my father's funeral, Brian had gone through the documents without asking and then made such a bold, selfish declaration. Laura, don't be too greedy, he added flippantly. Oh, now I can finally quit my job. I have to thank that old man, he sneered, referring to my father. My voice caught in disbelief, and hurt flooded through me. Are you talking about my dad? I blurted out, unable to contain my emotions. Anyway, let's just proceed with the inheritance process and get the money into our joint account as soon as possible, Brian continued, completely ignoring my shock and pain. He and my mother-in-law excitedly discussed plans to buy a new car and go on shopping sprees. I could feel my emotions boiling over. I was already drowning in household chores and constantly being asked for money, and now they were disrespecting my deceased father in the most casual, hurtful way. Sure, use the money however you and my mother-in-law please, I said, forcing a smile through gritted teeth. Well, that's the spirit, Laura, my mother-in-law said, seemingly satisfied. Now make sure you work hard and earn money. I don't want our savings to decrease, so work hard. Her words were selfish, and I could barely mask my frustration. I nodded, pretending to listen, all the while seething inside. After that, Brian and my mother-in-law started living as if they were suddenly millionaires. Brian quit his job almost immediately, and my mother-in-law practically moved in with us, always at our house. Every morning, they'd leave and return in the evening, laden with luxury brand items from their lavish spending sprees. They even began critiquing high-end restaurants, casually remarking things like, "The 3-star restaurant we went to today wasn't as great as I expected," as if they were seasoned food critics or celebrities, completely detached from reality. Meanwhile, I was left to manage all the household duties, treated like a live-in maid. Brian, convinced that my father's inheritance would be available at any moment, started withdrawing money carelessly from our joint account. My personal savings of $140,000 dwindled alarmingly. When I confronted them about their reckless spending, Brian just laughed it off. What are you worried about? Isn't $5 million coming soon? This kind of spending isn't a big deal. Despite my warnings and protests, Brian paid no attention to my concerns. A month later, Brian and my mother-in-law suddenly left for a vacation to Hawaii, leaving me behind to clean up the mess they had made. I wasn't invited, and after I waved them goodbye, I found myself alone at home. The silence felt almost suffocating, but it also made me realize it was time to take a firm stand. About a week later, while enjoying a quiet day, I was startled by a loud knock on the door. Peering through the intercom monitor, I saw Brian and my mother-in-law standing there, dressed in Hawaiian shirts, looking confused. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone calm but cold. Brian, clearly irritated by my response, snapped, "What's the deal? Why won't the door open?" I replied confidently, "I changed the locks, so of course it won't open." "Why?" he demanded, his frustration growing. "Let's talk at the nearby cafe," I suggested coolly. "Go ahead, I'll join you shortly." After a moment of shouting and futile attempts to get in, they finally gave up and left for the cafe. Once I was sure they were gone, I followed. When I arrived, they were already there, seething with fury. "What's this about?" Brian demanded. "Did you change the locks? Hand over the new keys right now." "There's no need for me to give you the new keys," I said, my voice steady. "You both need to leave the house." Brian's eyes narrowed in disbelief as I pulled a piece of paper from my bag. It was a divorce petition, already filled out. "Divorce?" he sputtered. "You're serious about divorcing me?" His mother, equally stunned, added, "Laura, why has it come to this?" I remained calm, unwavering. I had made up my mind to reclaim my life, to free myself from their constant selfishness and disrespect. "With the way you've been spending every day," I continued, "are you sure your finances are okay?" "What money?" Brian shot back defensively. "Of course, it's fine. Your father's inheritance is coming, right? There should still be over $90,000 in our joint account." Brian quickly pulled out his phone, eager to prove me wrong, but as he checked the bank account, his face fell. What's this? Why is the money gone? It was there just the other day." Hearing his panic, his mother checked her phone too, her face clouded with confusion. I decided it was time to reveal the truth. "Of course, it's gone," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm divorcing you." So I moved the $90,000 to my account as part of the property division. Brian's expression twisted with anger. What do you mean? That's impossible. His mother, red-faced with fury, joined in. No, that can't be true. I gave them a look of disbelief, shaking my head. Please, check for yourselves. Brian frantically scrolled through his phone. It says here, property inherited by one spouse from a parent is considered separate property, so it's not subject to division. His face turned pale as the reality set in. His mother stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Brian, now desperate, approached me, pleading, please, Laura, don't divorce me. I have no savings, no job. How am I supposed to live? His weak attempt to sway me only made me more resolute. Take responsibility for your actions, I replied, my voice firm. I will never forget how you both treated me. I'm divorcing you, and I'll go to court if I have to. Brian and his mother recoiled, stunned by the strength of my resolve. It was a side of me they had never seen before, and it made them shrink back in fear. They muttered to each other in disbelief, but I stood tall, walking out of the cafe with my head held high. In the weeks that followed, the divorce proceedings went smoothly. The $90,000 I had moved was duly recognized as part of the marital property division. Over time, I succeeded in removing Brian and his overbearing mother from my life and my home. As for them, Brian's reckless spending quickly caught up with him. He had burned through the money from our settlement and found himself buried under a mountain of bills, the result of lavish trips and impulsive credit card charges. With no money left, Brian and his mother were forced to take on even more debt and now live in a dilapidated apartment, struggling to climb out of the financial hole they had dug themselves into. The contrast between their previous lavish lifestyle and their current reality was jarring. As for me, I made significant changes to my life. I sold the condo I had once shared with Brian and moved into the apartment that had belonged to my father. I continued with my job, and thanks to my father's inheritance, I now enjoyed a comfortable financial situation. I lived with a deep sense of gratitude for my late father's legacy, which had given me the chance to start anew. With this fresh start, I was committed to cherishing my life, focusing on the simple pleasures, and protecting my happiness. I had overcome significant challenges, and I was stronger for it. My future was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it.